What if we lived in a world where the mob had magic? What if that magic granted them enough power to rival the government? Now, if I were to tell you this black magic is not just some whim of my imagination, but is in fact real, would you believe me? If you were to laugh at me and say such a world is not possible, I don't blame you. I wish I could believe the same thing. But over the past 6 years, I've compiled more information on the American mob than perhaps any other living person outside that organization. Gathering this mountain of evidence has taken every drag of effort I am capable of. I've been shot, stabbed, forced into hiding, and put under false arrest. I've been hunted, driven to the cliff's edge of insanity, drowned, resurrected, and drowned again. I've evaded assassins, had my life savings stolen from me, and even reconstructed my face through surgery. Perhaps my most trying difficulty has been the necessity to assume a false identity. After 6 years, I don't even know if I exist anymore. I've been pretending to be an aspiring author of all things. I've been going by the name Peter Christensen, playing along with the narrative that this is all just fiction, some conspiracy theory I made up for my own purposes. But nothing is further from the truth. After everything I've endured, I can no longer doubt the simple fact. The mob rose to power through black magic. There's no way I can account for every nefarious arcane crime they've committed, or every minute detail of their magical technologies, and I certainly cannot distill 6 years of research into a single video, but I can cover their most powerful magics, the founding pillars of their organization, so that you at least can be aware of what's out there. Awareness is the first step to a safer world. Let's go back to the 1890s, before the mob, before the necro cartels or the charming gangs. At this time, the streets of New York were little more than a sewer of humanity. Crime was aplenty, and the underworld was a seething mass of loosely organized gangs. Amidst this chaotic raffle, a group called the Cursed Hand rose above the rest, gaining a reputation as the most brutal of the street toughs. The eggheads watching this may recognize the Cursed Hand as the early name of the mob, but the question remains, what gave them such an edge? The answer is the most iconic of their magics, the bone wands. The Cursed Hand, you see, was a highly exclusive group. To join, members were required to create their own wands, which had to be carved from bone. If you're not familiar with bone wands, this may not sound too exclusive, a tad morbid perhaps, but nothing particularly strange. But you don't know how bone wands are made. First, the bone in question must come from a relative of the initiate. This is done because one of the key advantages of bone wands is they can only be wielded by the one who crafted them, and for that to work, the bone must have a strong genetic connection with the wielder. Most members of the Cursed Hand were first-generation immigrants, so unlike their mafioso cousins who still lived in the old country, they could not simply rob a grave, and most had to resort to dismembering a vulnerable living family member. Worse than this, though, is the process of imbuing magic into the bone. To accomplish this, the Cursed Hand initiate must first douse the bone with phlogiston and then use it to murder one of the initiate's family members. Many suspect this ritual, a process known as forging, is the cause of their irises turning red. Because of their blood-colored eyes, the locals of the old country believe these men to be demons or vampires, though this is purely superstition. The combination of magic fire and familicide symbolizes rebirth as a new man entering a new family. Perhaps this symbolism is the reason the mob call themselves the Phoenix families. Despite having this information, bone wands remain a mystery for modern-day researchers. No one outside the Phoenix families understands how they actually work, how bone wands can seemingly respond to thought alone, or how phlogiston, the crudest and most limited magical fuel, could be used to create weapons of such incredible power. But the deepest mystery of all is, why does forging only work if the wand crafter is of Italian descent? I hesitate to share my insights into this next form of magic as it's not technically considered black magic anymore, having been legalized in the early 1930s. However, it is impossible to understand the mob without mentioning the American Prohibition of the 1920s and 30s. It was this chapter of their history that elevated the Phoenix families from petty, albeit intimidating criminals to an international business empire. You may be wondering, if the bone wands were so powerful, why was this not the magic that elevated the Phoenix men to the top of the criminal food chain? The reason is simple. While bone wands are impressive, the process of making them is too limiting. No matter how powerful they are man to man, the Phoenix men never had the numbers or the financial clout to take on law enforcement. Most bone wand violence was thus limited to inter-gang warfare. As most policemen thought gangsters killing each other was actually a good thing, they were happy to let them at it and keep themselves out of the crossfire. The Prohibition is a different story. When alcohol was made illegal, it created a market the Phoenix families could easily exploit and monopolize. They rose to the top of the alcohol industry when they invented a brewing method that could combine alcohol alcohol with magic and still be safe to drink. It was the Prohibition mobsters who also discovered that different alcohols have different effects. Phlogiston vodka makes the drinker very weather resistant, cognac grants the ability to breathe underwater, and scotch gives minor improvements to the drinker's athletic abilities, just to name a few examples. While these may seem fun and playful, it was the invention of these alcoholic potions that enriched the mob, making them an estimated $90 to $120 billion annually from 1920 to 1933. These estimates are not adjusted for inflation. While ending Prohibition did eventually kill off this revenue source, the families already had the financial means to infect other industries with ease. The Phoenix family's days of obscurity were over. While many historians believe Prohibition to be the highlight of the mob's history, they are wrong. The real golden age of the mob didn't start until a decade after Prohibition ended, lasting from the early 1940s to the late 1970s. During this time, they had senators, federal judges, countless cops and detectives, and even 2 presidents on their payroll. They were the undisputed emperors of the criminal underworld and had operations not only in the American kingdoms, but in Europe, South America, Australia, and Asia. All of this power was only possible because of their tattoos. But unlike bone ones and alcohol potions, enchanted tattoos were not invented by the Phoenix families. Gangsters with Jewish ancestry created magical tattoos by mixing carbon inks with alkahest. If you wish to learn more about alkahest, check out my magic system video for more information. These gangsters were inspired by their religious ancestors and wanted to use their language, Hebrew, to code spells into their skin to become living wands. The idea failed, but it failed in an intriguing direction. Out of morbid curiosity, a young hitman remembered only by his street name Little Sparky started tattooing the bodies of his victims. He soon discovered that by tattooing dead bodies using Hebraic script, he could reanimate them as if they were still alive. Inspired by the legend of his ancestors, Little Sparky called his tattoo victims his golems. These golems could effectively act as the people they had been when alive, and Little Sparky would use them as sleeper agents to help his crew with assassination assignments. In the mid-1930s, armed with a small army of golems, Little Sparky took on 2 partners, Barney Boggs and the Whiz Kid, to form an Assassins for Hire guild. They called themselves Killer Incorporated. Killer Inc. soon partnered with the Phoenix families, among other crime groups, and acted as the enforcement arm for their organization. Over time, the Phoenix families grew covetous of Killer Inc.'s golem army and wished to create their own. Eventually, the families managed to persuade Barney Boggs to divulge the secret process for creating golems. In 1949, after the Phoenix men successfully created their first golem, they assassinated the Whiz Kid and Little Sparky and incorporated Barney Boggs into their organization. Over the following years, they continued to advance tattoo enchantments, though I have no way of knowing how far. But I can say that with unmitigated control over their golem army, the Phoenix families dominated the world for nearly 4 decades with almost zero competition. The decline of the Phoenix families began at a strange time. For the first 5 years, it did not look like they had gone amiss, but had made the best business decision in their history. During that 5-year period, they even out-earned the Phoenix men of the Prohibition era. In the late 1970s, necrotics were introduced to the American market. Necrotics are a type of consumable magic made from a combination of phlogiston, alkahest, pieces of dead bodies, and strangely, cinnamon. While this magical cannibalism may seem abhorrent to you, as well it should, most consumers are not aware of the exact ingredients necrotics require. Mostly, they just want the inexplicable euphoria they provide. It's as if they can experience for a short time what it's like to be someone else, someone better looking, someone smarter, someone with all the luck in the world. However, with chronic consumption, necrotics melt the minds and skin of the consumers, turning them into zombie-like beings, barely alive and with their only thoughts focused on consuming human flesh. These extreme symptoms only occur years after addiction has taken hold of the consumer. The Phoenix families were the first to exploit these terrible potions, and their imagination knew few limits. The early necrotics could only be brewed as drinks, but within a year of incorporating them into their operations, the Phoenix men invented necrotic skin creams, pills, injections, powders to snort, and bark that could be chewed on like tobacco. The Phoenix men did not realize the mistake they had made until years after it was too late. By popularizing necrotics, which are incredibly easy to make, they made it possible for anyone with ambition to cook and deal them on their own. What's more, necrotic addicts acted as counterparts to the Phoenix men's golem armies. Within 5 years, necro cartels from Central and South America rose to power, chipping away at the mob's business piece by piece. However, their decline is far more complicated than one mere business oversight. Necrotics were merely the first of 1,000 cuts, but that story is for another video. But just because the Phoenix families fell into decline, it doesn't mean you can lull yourself into a false sense of security. The Phoenix men are still out there, waiting for the right moment to return to power. And if you subscribe to this channel, you will be doing your part to finally stamp out the Phoenix men once and for all.